Before we continue with introductions, I just want to start with a land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that the Environfocus Knowledge and Culture Exchange Program is on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Angelica, and I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator for EKCEP. I'm also joined with Obi Agosabe, the manager of the EKCEP program and the CEO of Environfocus. That is a sustainability services firm with a social enterprise outlook focused on improving the sustainability performance of organizations and communities through activities that align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So Environfocus Knowledge and Culture Exchange Program, which is EKCEP. EKCEP is a transformative youth educational program. It provides an avenue for teachers and youth from developed and developing countries to work together in solving sustainability issues affecting continents. The program facilitates knowledge and skill transfer of the need for diversity and inclusivity of cultures at the middle and high school levels. So right now we are in collaboration with Canadian and Nigerian high school students. So here at EKCEP, at the EKCEP program, we are in week 5, which is learning from the experts in the field of sustainable communities and cities, focusing on the Sustainable Development Goal 11. And that's the students' focus for this year's EKCEP program. And we are super fortunate to have Julius Lindsay with us today as the director of the Sustainable Communities from the David Suzuki Foundation. He has worked on many projects pertaining to climate change and sustainable development in Richmond Hill and Mississauga areas. So please join me in welcoming Julius. So I will give the floor to Julius to give an introduction of what he does and some of the projects that he's worked on in Richmond Hill and the Mississauga area.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So as it was said, I'm the Director of Sustainable Communities at the David Suzuki Foundation. My team currently leads climate action in cities across the country. So we're currently working in 5 cities across the country: Vancouver, Edmonton, Regina, Peel region, so like Brampton, Mississauga, and then Montreal. And we work with citizens, community groups, city staff, and counselors to get climate action passed, boost climate ambition, and to help them from an implementation standpoint for their climate action plans. I've been at the foundation for about 8 months now, and previous to that, I spent the last 10 years in cities leading development of climate change plans. So I led the development of the city climate change plans for both the city of Mississauga and the city of Richmond Hill. And that included a whole bunch of public engagement and as well as like strategy work, working with stakeholders and city staff and counselors to come up with a unified vision and plan for climate action. And previous to that, I worked at the provincial level here in Ontario, doing energy management and climate change work in the province's real estate portfolio. And lastly, I'm also one of the co-founders of the Black Environmentalist Alliance, which is an organization that has been created to support Black people who work in the environmental field. I've worked in environment for 15 years, and I've never worked directly with another Black person, and that is not a unique experience. And so the organization was really created to create sort of a community around those of us Black people who work in the environment space. So yeah, I think that's a good overview.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Seems like you do a lot, which is amazing for the cities. It's really important that we focus on city and sustainable cities due to the current climate events and everything like that. So we're just gonna head on into the Q&A and we'll just get started from there. So my first question is, what do your day-to-day activities look like being the director of sustainable communities at the David Suzuki Foundation?
Every day is different, but a lot of my work is focused around sort of two areas of focus. One is around sort of community engagement or public engagement. I kind of hesitate to use the public engagement term because it's not so much the public, but we work with community groups and interested persons and organizations in the cities that we work in to help them push for greater action, to do studies or work on the ground to help promote or to move climate action forward. On the other side, we do a whole bunch of like what I would call like research and policy work, looking at, okay, if we want to get to a net zero resilient future, what is it going to take? What kind of things should we consider? We do research looking at people's attitudes and understanding what that transition might look like, what it's going to take. Actually, and there's a third piece of our work, which is around storytelling. So we do a whole bunch of work around storytelling of people in this space who are doing work. We're looking at promoting the stories of ordinary people in Canada around climate change, and really trying to raise the profile of the fact that like this is not new, cutting edge, like no one done it before stuff, but people are doing it, and you can do it too.
Right, that's awesome. Yeah, I just finished completing a module in policy work at my university, and we really looked at how policies and everything specific to climate change and sustainable communities and what the city currently has control of and they have control of a lot. So it's interesting. And we particularly looked at it from the federal level. So just kind of moving up in levels of government. So I find it really interesting that you guys are looking at the policy work and stuff like that. And also including the storytelling because it affects all of us, climate change. So that's really awesome. Thank you for sharing. So my next question is, what sustainable challenges does your organization face, or what do you face when you're promoting your own initiatives to the public?
I think the biggest challenge is just like, for lack of a better term, people's attention spans. Like there's lots going on, COVID is still here.
Yeah.
And like, I always say that like I've spent 10 years working in cities on climate change, and I've never attended the city that I live in. I've never attended any of the events that they've done around climate change or any other issue. And it's just because like I have 2 kids, I'm married, I have a full-time job, I have a second full-time hustle on the side. I'm just busy, and there's like, it's a battle for people's attentions. I think the second thing is just understanding and like having people understand what those issues are, how they can participate or how they can impact their community, or how they can participate in the things that their community is doing. Lots of people just, they don't know, and so they're paralyzed by that, or they don't care because they don't know. And so a large part of the work that I've always done in this space is around education and awareness, so that people understand what the issues are, understand how it affects them, and understand what they can do.
Right. I completely agree with your first point about it being very busy, and sustainability and sustainable communities isn't a new topic, but it's really important that we bring awareness to it, especially to our high school students today, because it's like try defining sustainability in your own words. It's very difficult. There's so many different ways to look at it. So it's great to be educated and informed on the topic. So yeah, that's great. So my next question is, what actions do you think are most effective in ensuring that sustainable communities are being prioritized in neighborhoods/municipalities?
I mean, from keeping it as a priority, I think is just like raising your voice, that it is important. I think, staff at cities, counselors at cities, those in the communities need to hear that people care about it and that people want to see things happen to make them more sustainable. I think the other thing is just to like is to do it. There's lots of ways in people's lives, including like, you know, recycling and reducing their energy usage, and many, you know, walking instead of taking the car, things like that. Like there's many different ways you can do that in your own life. And so sort of walking the talk and encouraging others in your circle to walk that talk, because to make sure that's being prioritized, people need to know that people care, they want to see it happen, and that they're willing to do it themselves as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Yeah, I think especially with like new, just as a quick example of like recycling initiatives, like some people just are still on the edge of like how to recycle. So just like talking the talk and just really informing and educating people like, okay, this is one little step you can do to just make that as a priority of being a sustainable community. So completely agree. So my next question is, I understand that you have experience with being a connector and translator between departments and companies, and even now talking to the public about sustainable communities and sustainability in general. What do you find is often miscommunicated within the sustainability corporate sector, and what do you think the root cause of this miscommunication is?
I don't know if I know that there's much that's being miscommunicated, but to go to the root cause piece, I think it's really around language. And I find it's interesting that you know, you have students from Canada that will see this, and you have students from I think you said Nigeria that will see this.
Yes.
And you know, part of it is just language. You know, if two people are speaking to each other, they might actually think that they're saying the same things, but they may not actually be saying the same things. And I see this often, especially when I was in the city. You know, you take engineers and you take planners, you take ecologists, even if they were all super excited to work together and really wanted to collaborate, which is often not the case. Even if they all were really super excited to work together and enthusiastic to work together, you put them all in the same room, and they may all be using the same words, but they're not speaking the same language. And so part of that translation is really making sure that, you know, when I say that I'm talking about sustainability, or I'm talking about a road, or I'm talking about transportation, that when you say transportation and I say transportation, we're both talking about the same thing, and we understand that we're both talking about it in the same way. And that often happens even in like within organizations, but especially across organizations. And so you got to really be careful that, you know, we may all be using the same words, we may all be saying very different things. And that has been a lot of my role, is sort of being I always call it a jack of all trades, but a master of some, because I have to be able to understand that when a planner is talking about this and an engineer is talking about that, that I can translate that language so that they know that like they're talking about the same thing, and I'm making sure that they're talking about the same thing, so that when we get to like, okay, what do we want to do? How are we going to do it? Everybody is on the same page. And that's a really important part of, especially in the climate space, where and the sustainability space, where like, you know, everybody needs to be involved. Everybody's got a role to play. We have to be interdisciplinary. You know, it's really important to make sure that when you're talking about methods, when you're talking about the way to do things, when you're talking about even approaching problems and solutions, that you're all using the same language and you're all on the same page. An engineer and a lawyer and a ecologist, they all use certain terms, but they all think very differently. They all approach their work very differently. And so, you know, if most solutions are going to need all of those people, and so you're going to need to make sure that when you're building those solutions, that everybody understands what the solution actually is and how their role is in it.
Right. And I feel like that can probably be very difficult kind of getting all of them on board, because everyone has their own goal and their own objective when they get onto a project. So just learning how to collaborate in that way so that the goal is met is, yeah, I totally agree, very important.
But that's part of the I think the strength of being that translator is, and part of the point of that translation is also a translation of goals and objectives, because often people think, well, this is what I want to do, and like this is where I'm trying to go. But then when you do that translation, you might understand, well, if you help that other person get to their goal, you're helping yourself get to your goal.
Yeah.
And you are it isn't a zero-sum game of, if I get where I'm trying to go, you're not going to get to where you want to go. Oftentimes these solutions can be crafted in a way that everybody gets, moves towards their goal, and we're supporting each other, and people then understand that I don't have to focus only on me. I can help that other person, and when I'm helping that other person, I'm helping myself, and it's actually going to help me do my own work in a better way, better than I would do on my own. And so from the translation aspect, that is a key part of the translation, is getting people to understand that doing it together and understanding what other people are trying to do and helping them get to where they're trying to go is actually going to be better for yourself and help you get to where you're trying to go easier, faster, or better. And so it's ultimately like helping everybody be selfish, but in a collaborative, in a group way.
Yeah, I guess that's you being a great communicator, right? That's being a great communicator, because being a great communicator, you're able to achieve those things.
Well, it's communication, but it's also listening as well. You have to be a really good listener, because you have to be able to hear what people are really saying or what they really want to happen. And that often doesn't always happen right away. So communicating is important, but listening is doubly important.
Yeah. Yeah, in order to communicate accurately, you have to actually listen to the people and what they're saying for you to actually communicate and know that your communication is meeting, as in is actually achieving what you want. What you're saying is actually being heard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I agree. So what are ways students can get involved with projects that are happening within the Sustainable Communities Department at the David Suzuki Foundation? Or do you guys have any projects currently that we should be aware of and we can somehow get involved?
Well, there's two ways that I think folks can get involved. One is direct and one is indirect. So the first one is the direct one is like signing up for the email list, because the way some of our work happens, and especially if you're in any of those 5 cities that I just named, the way our work happens is that oftentimes through our email lists, we will push out actions for people to do, whether it's like, writing to your counselor, or whether it's writing to the mayor, or whether it's attending a public meeting, or any of those types of things. And so that's one way to definitely get involved in the work that we're doing. The second way, which is sort of indirect, is to find climate action groups in your community that you could get involved in. And so a lot of our work that we do is supporting groups in communities. And so finding a group in the community that you live in, or starting one yourself and getting in touch with the David Suzuki Foundation to see how you can be supported, is another way that you can get involved in the work that we do, because we take a leading from behind approach. And so we often work with groups on the ground in those communities and support them in terms of mentoring them, providing resources, helping them do the work that they are, and supporting them in terms of moving their community to be more sustainable, either with their counselor or with just folks in the community. And so that's a more indirect way to get involved, but that's a lot of the work that we're doing. So I think if you're interested in making your community more sustainable, then getting involved in the groups that are in your community is a really great way to go about doing that.
Awesome, thank you. So on the topic of just like gaining understanding, kind of figuring out this whole sustainable community topic, speaking to high school students, what is some advice you can give to them to get a better understanding of what it takes to create a sustainable community? Or what are the factors we should have in mind when we are creating those groups, those climate change groups within our communities and whatnot?
Yeah, there's lots of resources out there. I mean, if you were if you were to take a spin around the David Suzuki Foundation website, there's lots of resources. We do have a particular resource called Your Seat at the Table that is like a toolkit for how you can be supported, or like what kind of actions you can take to support your community in becoming more sustainable. As well, when I was in Richmond Hill, we developed a toolkit that was a conversation toolkit. So it was literally called A Guide to Talking to People in Your Life About Climate Change. But there was a bunch of resources in there about climate change and how it affects the community, but also a bunch of resources in there and how you have a conversation with somebody in your life, and not necessarily like a stranger on the street, but how do you talk to your mom about it? How do you talk to your aunt about it? How do you talk to your friends about it?
Mhm.
And some of the sort of questions and rebuttals that people might bring up, how do you deal with those, and what kind of information is important? And there's a whole bunch of resources in there. And so there's a whole bunch of like online resources that you can find that would support in terms of learning more about understanding what it takes to create a sustainable community. And in terms of like areas of focus, I think it would be probably very different between here in Canada and in Nigeria. But I know I can speak to this region, the GTA region where I live. Most cities, number one and number two areas of climate change emissions is transportation and buildings. And so reducing emissions in those areas, especially from energy efficiency, from getting people out of their cars, more walking, more cycling, more transit use, are definitely like key areas of focus for making the community more sustainable. There are other areas of focus like waste and what are some of the other areas? Waste and land use planning, but a lot of those areas, I mean, waste is something that people can somewhat have some control over themselves, but a lot of the other areas are areas of sort of organizational focus or like city focus.
Right.
And so there's less of an impact of sort of personal or group impact, and more from the impact of like understanding what needs to be done and then advocating or pushing your community to do some of those things.
Right. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So bringing it to our viewers, are there any questions that you would like to ask Julius Lindsay about his background in sustainable communities or what he's working on right now? You can feel free to type it in the chat. Just give them a minute or two to do that.
Okay, I'll ask a question then. Let me ask a question. So, Julius, what would you think is most challenging thing about doing projects, right? Trying to set up projects or do projects in sustainability?
Well, that's a big question. I think the biggest challenge that I see, well, I shouldn't, let me break it down into two big challenges. So one is willingness. And so any project that you take from a sustainability perspective, like I said, it's going to be interdisciplinary. You're probably going to need a lot of different voices at the table. And sort of getting the willingness of people to participate and to engage. And then once you get them to participate and engage, getting them to engage and participate in a collaborative way is always one of the biggest challenges that I see. The second biggest challenge that I would say is more from the perspective of like inertia. And I use the example, I often use the example of when I was working in Richmond Hill, our offices were up at the intersection of Highway 404 and Highway 7. And so you're coming off of like a major 6-lane freeway onto like 6-lane Boulevard Street into an industrial area with a bunch of buildings that like you cannot walk between. And every time I used to drive up there, I used to like have this moment, like at least 2 or 3 times a week when I drove up there, I would have this moment where I'd be like, this is impossible. Like we're never going to be able to get to where we need to be. And so like a lot of our society is sort of in this inertia piece of like, this is the way it's always been, this is the way it should be done, you know, and like, we can't do it any differently, or like, not even getting to the point of like, we can't do it any differently because it's so ingrained in the way we do things. We don't even think about other possibilities. And there are very many possibilities to the way we live and operate as a society. And so I think that is a really big challenge that like, I don't have any answers how to get over, but I think it's a really big challenge. And I think that's where a lot of the education piece comes in, is challenging that narrative from the beginning that like, this is the way we need to do it, or this is the way it's done, or that we can't do it any other way. Like, we can think very differently about the way our society operates, but we need to actually start by giving ourselves the freedom to think differently about the way our society operates. And that freedom it can be quite challenging to get people to accept.
Yeah, that's that's very challenging, right? And I guess, but that's where being able to communicate, and being able to like how you said that in Richmond Hill you had there's this you had created quite a bit of information as to how to communicate climate change, right? How to communicate the need. How do you think, can we get access to that? Because maybe that will help. Maybe we can have that for our students, see, maybe, I think that will help a great deal. It's not the answer, but it's a start, right?
Yeah, I was just looking up the link. So let me drop it in the chat. I'll find it and I'll drop a link in the chat, because there's a bunch of really great information in there, especially, like I said, about how to talk to other people in your life about climate change. So let me just pull up the link, and then I will drop it in the chat.
It's really a struggle trying to get people to understand why they should do what they should do and how it impacts them, right? How it impacts their everyday life. Like how you tell them that, look, if we do not reduce our impact, you will not get, you won't be getting maple syrup anymore. Yes, things like that. So
yeah, and I think a part of that is like, also, I think we're seeing some of the effects of that. Like here in the GTA this past weekend, we had that huge storm, 200,000 people lost power in the region, or 200,000 customers, which is a lot more people, lost power in the region. Like, these are the types of things that are predicted to happen. Like, it's not like this is coming out of nowhere and like we never saw this coming. Like, this is what's predicted to happen more frequently.
Yeah.
And so understanding that, like, you are already being affected by this. Like, this is not something that's going to happen in 30 years, or this is not about ice caps melting in the north and like polar bears don't have a home. This is something that is affecting you. If you lost power on Saturday, climate change is affecting you. And so thinking about it from that perspective, and thinking about the fact that these costs are increasing and these effects are increasing, making your communities more sustainable is more than just saving a polar bear. That it is about enabling you to continue to live in your community into the future.
Yeah.
And thinking about, when I was working in cities, we often use that term of like, what's in it for me? And it's unfortunate that you have to kind of position that way, but it's really important to position that way so that people understand that like, this affects me, this is affecting our community. When I was in Mississauga, we used to use the tagline of like, climate change is real, it's here, and everybody has a role to play. And so like, everybody's got to understand, what is my role and how do I play?
Yeah, and speaking about the storm that happened last week, a lot of trees broke, right? And I was listening to the news a couple of days ago, and they were like, this is going to be the norm, right? So everybody check the trees around where you live, make sure that they stand, make sure they're not rotten, make sure the direction where they're standing, because when the next storm comes, you do not know which direction those trees are going to fall. See, it's crazy.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like, these are things that 30 years ago, probably nobody thought about. But
Mhm.
like, you do have to think about, because like, even for me, like the storm happened on Saturday. It wasn't until Monday that I went into my backyard and I realized there was 2 huge branches on the ground in my backyard. And we didn't lose power, luckily, but my aunt, who lives like literally a 10-minute walk from me, she lost power for 6 hours, and she's 80 something. She lives by herself. She lives in an apartment building on the 7th floor, so she can't walk downstairs. These are the types of things that we have to think about as we think about our communities and we think about how we're going forward. And again, it means that we have to think differently about how we approach our communities and what living in our community means. 30 years ago, you may not have to think about the fact that you may have branches on the floor in your backyard. You have to think about the health of your tree because it might fall over on your house. But now these are very real planning things that we need to think about. In Toronto, we have lots of towers. When the power goes out, the way water pressure works, water doesn't go higher than the 10th floor. So any tower you're in, if your tower loses power, anybody above the 10th floor will have no water. And so when you think about that sick, I think about my aunt, she's luckily on the 7th floor, but if she was on the 11th floor of her building and 8 hours without water, what does that do for an 80-year-old person? What kind of situation does that create for her if she hasn't planned to have water in the fridge or other sources of water, blah, blah, blah. These are the types of realities that we need to start thinking about in the future with respect to climate change. And so that's why we want to take action now to prevent this becoming a really bad situation or really fundamentally affecting the way that we live in our cities and in our communities.
Yeah, so we do have 2 questions in the chat. So just speaking on what we're talking about right now about climate change and the rain and everything, we have one question from Hope. What type of sustainable initiatives have you seen to strengthen emergency preparedness in relation to climate change?
This is a really new area of focus. Especially in Ontario. But I've seen some really interesting things done. The one that immediately came to mind is that in Brampton, they've created what they call it the Lighthouse Program. And basically what it means is that the Emergency Preparedness Department for the city of Brampton has basically signed up faith buildings in the community. So in your neighborhood, you got churches, you got mosques, you got gurdwaras in Brampton. And so what they've done is they've worked with those community centers that are not city community centers to provide them with information, with training, with resources, so that again, if the power were to go out, people could go to those spaces as opposed to going to a city building or trying to make it somewhere far away. They could go to the church around their corner and find heating or find food or find water or find medical support. And they've really empowered those buildings in their community to be able to do that, and providing those buildings with training and resources to be able to do that, because the city only has so many people and so much money, and these buildings are embedded in their communities and know their communities, right? Those buildings and the people in those buildings are going to know the people who live in that neighborhood way better than anybody at City Hall could ever. And so they've basically created a network of to support the people in their communities if a disaster were to happen. Other things are more on the prevention side in terms of when I was in Mississauga, there was a large what's called a bioswale built. So basically it's like a ditch in the ground that they plant vegetation into. And so when large floods happen, the water congregates into that trench and it infiltrates into the ground. So you reduce the flooding in the area because it captures the water, it holds it there for a while. And then it also allows it to kind of discharge into the ground as opposed to like going over the road or going into your basement or whatever the case is. And so those are the 2 sort of examples that come to mind immediately, but there's many other sort of activities and strategies that happen. And some of them come directly from things from areas in the world where hurricanes or tornadoes or earthquakes are more prevalent because you have early warning systems, you have training that happens, there's like requirements from a building perspective of how you build your building to withstand those things. Like these are all strategies that are now being brought into the climate change realms because there are things that are happening like what happened on Saturday. They're happening in places where they never happened before. I think I don't know if it was confirmed, but I know there was some tornadoes that happened on Saturday, and that's something that there are parts of Ontario that have that, but they're happening in areas of Ontario that doesn't traditionally happen. And so we can learn a lot from areas like Kansas where they have tornadoes every year, and that's just a part of living in that area.
I know, I think it was last month or a couple of months ago, and I think a tornado happened in Barrie, right? And people's houses were blown away, they were broken down. And I have a friend of mine, her house was actually broken down. And they heard the tornado, they heard the tornado coming. I think it was a tornado, yeah. They heard it coming, but they only heard it just as the minute it was about to strike the house. So they were only able to rush to their basement, right? Before it actually hit. So they left with, they got, as in they were so lucky to just have some bruises on their body, but their house was gone. So they had to now, they had to go rent an apartment, stay in a hotel, right? So it was that bad. Their house was demolished. So, and these are all the impacts, right? It's crazy, but it's really...
And you're seeing that more frequently. And so when you think about building houses in Barrie, we should be changing our regulations of how you build houses to withstand those types of tornadoes. Mm-hmm. And in areas like Kansas, they have early warning systems as well, so that there's sirens in the neighborhood that go off that say a tornado's coming, because they can you can meteorologists can look at the conditions in the atmosphere and tell that a tornado is coming, and then warn people that you got to leave, you got to go, you got to get in your basement, or you have a fortified part of your house that will protect you. But these are all things, again, in Barrie, I'm sure no one there has ever thought about that thing because it's probably never happened before. Mm-hmm. And so, thinking about these effects, and we do have data that sort of tells us how the climate is going to change in this region. Thinking about what those things are and then starting to prepare for them. I remember that tornado, and one of the houses had the roof clear blown off. The thing that you put in your house, and you can't put it in afterward, you have to do it when you build your house, but the thing that you put in your house to prevent your roof from blowing away costs about $5 a house.
Seriously?
And so it's not a huge cost to add these things to the house. It's just, it has to be done when the house is built. And so, you have to build those regulations and put those rules in place. So when you're building that house, whoever's building the house is spending that $5 to put those things in so that the roof doesn't blow away when that happens again. But again, we have to this is a part of the sort of changing of the inertia in terms of how we build houses, how we think about, how we regulate how houses are built, how we think about what's in them, how we think about how we protect people in those buildings. This is the direction we need to go in. As we move forward and as climate change, affects us more and more.
Awesome. Okay, so we also have another question. What are the main methods to track the success of sustainability initiatives for cities and communities? And is success defined beyond scientific empirical measures, such as the inclusivity of Indigenous communities?
The second part of the question is no. It currently has not moved beyond sort of scientific and very Western ways of thinking. But that conversation has started. I know from my work, I'm really interested in that space, but I also want to be sure that when we're talking about that space, that we're not being extractive. So we're not just going to Indigenous people and saying to them, you got to tell us how to fix this problem, when they aren't the ones who created the problem, Right. And so we have to be really careful when we think about incorporating Indigenous ways of knowing and being. when we're talking about climate action. And actually, thinking about this program and the fact that you have students here and in Nigeria, like it would be really interesting to compare and contrast some of those ways in which things are being measured between here and Africa. In terms of the main methods that are used to track sustainability initiatives, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, reduction in waste. The engagement is a big piece of it as well, from a still scientific empirical, but a little bit more on the social side, is like how many people are participating in events, how many people are coming out to things that are about making things more sustainable, how many people are talking about these things online or engaging with the online content, like the link that I shared today with the conversation toolkit. They're definitely tracking how many people are downloading it. They have ways like, once you use it, please get in contact with the city and provide feedback, so on and so forth. But tracking success is also really tough because of the length of time that it takes for some of these things to show up. If you take action today, there's not necessarily you're not necessarily going to see the effects even in the next 5 years. And so, going back to that, thinking differently about empirical and scientific, imperial and Western ways of thinking, is that idea that we won't be able to do something today and see the result tomorrow. And just because we can't see the result tomorrow doesn't mean that there isn't any value in doing that, because that's sort of the implication, is that if I do it today and I can't track it tomorrow, then is it really worth doing? And so, especially from a climate change perspective, we have to think longer term and think about the scale and the timeline of it, a much bigger and much longer.
Yeah, that's a huge drawback when it comes to deciding if an initiative is successful or not, right? Because it's always looked at short term, and sometimes the results are not short term results. They are you have to give it time, right? You have to give projects time. You have to give projects time to evolve, right? You have to actually experiment on these things when it comes to sustainability issues. So yep, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Okay, so my last final question, if there's any final words or thoughts you would like to close on before we end, or anything you want us to know about the David Suzuki Foundation, the floor is yours.
And also about the students, how, what you want the students to know specifically, and how they can make their society and the communities they live in better. Be it Canada, be it Nigeria,
Yeah, I think, I always close on or I try to, anyways, I shouldn't say always, but I always try to close on, a call to action. And I said it earlier, there are things that you can do in your own daily lives that can make, your community more sustainable, and everybody doing something small adds up to something big, if you have control over it, turning down the thermostat in your house 1 degree, making sure that you're sorting your waste correctly, going vegetarian for a day. I am a huge meat person, but my family tries at least one day a week to not have meat. These are all small things that add up in a big way, and thinking consciously about these things. And the other thing, like I said before, is really if you're really passionate about getting involved or making a community more sustainable, is getting involved with groups that might be, or getting involved with other people in your area who might be doing things. And, in the area that I live, there's a small park by my house. There's a whole Friends of the Park organization that does cleanups, and they're planting a pollinator garden there in a few weeks. And there are other climate change organizations that I engage with through my work in my community and in communities across the country. And so finding there's power in numbers. So finding a group, and it might be a bit of trial and error in terms of you join one group, you're not a fan of the people, they're not doing things that you're really interested in doing. But there's usually groups out there and all of the groups are desperately looking for people to get involved. So there's no shortage of places that you can get involved. And I think the last piece that I would say is just continue to learn. Like, I'm 40 years old now officially, so I'm officially old. But I am definitely a lifelong learner. I'm still considering going back to school, like, just continue to learn. And learning doesn't only happen in a very sort of structured school kind of sense, but, I'm a big reader, social media, like, I remember somebody told me recently that TikTok is a bigger search engine than Google now. Like, more people are going on TikTok to find information on how to do things than they're going to Google to find information on how to do things. And that just speaks to the fact that, like, there's so many different spaces and places that you can learn how to do things. You can learn information about things. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to read a textbook or you got to sit in a classroom. And so just being open to learning in everywhere you go and everything that you do is something that I think if you want to change the world, which was really what we're talking about today, we're talking about changing the world, is a key part of doing the work of making your community more sustainable and just a better place to live.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for your time and speaking to us, and everybody who joined. Thank you so much for listening. This was such a great and informative session. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And if you guys can find us on our social media accounts at EKCEP. And we also do have a fundraiser going on for our students at EKCEP here. And I will be putting that link in the chat, and also go look at the link that Julius put in the chat, which is also really informative, the Richmond Hill Climate Change Conversation Toolkit, and you can learn more there. So thank you so much, Julius.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's great discussion. Great. A lot to learn. Thank you.
Thanks.